If you showed this book to your average kind of Ben Shapiro type of conservative, they would shudder and tell you to think of the children or that you're going to go to hell or whatever. So it's an interesting... What does it mean for a book to be punk? Is a question I'm going to answer in another video soon. But if you're looking for an example, this is punk. This is 100 Boyfriends by Brontez Purnell, and it is a collection of 25 queer love stories, or queer stories about love, more specifically, gay stories about lust and love and sex. Before reading 100 Boyfriends, I wasn't actually familiar with the works of Brontez Purnell, but his bio at the back of the book says that he is a writer, musician, dancer, filmmaker, and performance artist. Brontez Purnell is a multifaceted artist, and what we have here is proof of that multifacetedness within his imagination and his capacity for exploring life and love through writing. He is a poet, depending on how you define that word. Brontez Purnell is gay. Brontez Purnell is black. And these aspects of his identity run all the way through 100 Boyfriends. Stories which discuss race and class and identity and gender and sex and sexuality in modern day America, all the way through every single story, and even when they seem like or feel like they don't. When I call this book punk, what I mean is that it lifts a veil. Within Western society, we have subjects and topics that some people consider taboo and others don't. For many people, sex is a taboo subject in and of itself. For others, particularly more conservative types, gay sex or any kind of queer sex can be seen as a slightly more taboo topic than straight sex or male-female sex. And Brontez Purnell approaches that in a punk kind of a manner, by lifting that veil and not being concerned with it. He writes however he sees fit, about whatever topic he feels like. Consequences be damned, the feelings and reactions of his readers be damned as well. That's punk. What all of this means is that the subject matter of 100 Boyfriends is very raw, and it could appear to some readers as something that's very, very radical. And for that reason, the stories in this book are shocking, they are funny, they are tragic, and as Brian Washington, who is an author that I have talked about in the past, I've done a video on one of his books, you can go watch that, there's a thing here now. Brian Washington said of this collection, "I laughed and I cried and I laughed until I cried." And that is pretty apt. This is a very all-encompassing kind of a book that stretches across a pretty broad emotional chasm. These are all stories about love and sex and relationships, as I've already said. But what's interesting about them is how they approach those subjects and topics. Every story in here behaves like a very small snippet. It is not a complete tale. These are sections of a life. And you're not really sure if that life is Brontez Purnell's. Almost every story in here, not every story, but almost every story, probably 80–90% of the stories in here, are written in the first person, from the perspective of an anonymous, nameless narrator. And it could very easily be the case that this is a piece of autofiction, that this is personally inspired, it is a memoir of a sort, but that doesn't really add up, because if you pay attention to the different jobs of the characters in them, if you pay attention to where they went to university, where they live, the roommates, the jobs they have, their background, etc., they don't all add up. It's more likely that each of these is an original piece of fiction that Brontez Purnell chooses to write repeatedly in the first person, because not all of them are written in the first person. Some of them are written just in the third person with a nameless protagonist. Others have protagonists that are given names and written in the third person. So there is a spectrum there. But most of them really are just a first person narration from an anonymous source, and that anonymous source is a person going through a sexual or romantic experience as a young queer or middle-aged queer, usually black protagonist. Now, as I said, and as Brian Washington said, these stories are really funny. Not all of them, some of them are brutally tragic. There is one in particular which comes at the end of Act 1. There are 3 acts in this book, which I'll explain in a second, but the very final story of Act 1 is a story that is written in the third person about a boy, and this boy is only in primary school and he's being bullied on the school bus by another boy. Our protagonist is clearly gay and very young and figuring himself out, and the bully appears to be gay as well and is kind of sexually assaulting him on the bus. And the story of these 2 boys and the environment that they live in and their school life and their family lives gets gently explored. This is one of the slightly longer stories in the collection. Rather than being 2 or 3 pages, it's like 10 pages, and that gives it a little bit more room to grow and to define these characters, and it's pretty tragic. But there are other stories that are painfully hilarious, even while exploring a pretty tragic situation. And the best example of that comes right in the middle. In the middle of Act 2, in the middle of the entire book, is a story called This Day and Many More. And it begins with our, again, nameless first-person protagonist. In his bedroom, he has 2 roommates. One of the roommates is this British guy who's having sex, and our protagonist is wanking off and listening to it through the wall. And then it cuts a little bit later in the story to our protagonist being woken up by their third roommate saying, "Come quick, come help," etc. And it says this: "I click my lamp on and it's my other roommate, Stephen. I hate Stephen because he's a flaming piece of human garbage. He has lived off unemployment for the past year and somehow manages to drink even more than I do." And then it goes on a little bit and we get reintroduced to our British roommate, the one who was having sex at the beginning of the story, and it says, "I look down and notice that both of his wrists are slashed and dripping blood onto my vintage Hello Kitty rug. I am immediately caffeinated with hate and vengeance. I don't think he understands that that rug means more to me than his life. I have half a mind to go back to sleep and let his punk ass die, but of course I'm all like, 'Oh my god, baby, are you okay?'" These are punk stories. These are very shocking and darkly funny, tragic tales. This is tragicomedy, if I'm using that term right. There are no shackles on this book, and I think that's why I'm repeatedly calling it punk. These are stories that very, very positively, negatively, hilariously, and grimly explore sex. Snowy, shush. Come here. Alright, sit here with me. If you spend a lot of time on the internet, you know that there are people who are more conservative who refer to people on the left as snowflakes, etc., and think that we have sensitive dispositions. And yeah, if you showed this book to your average kind of Ben Shapiro type of conservative, they would shudder and tell you to think of the children or that you're going to go to hell or whatever. So it's an interesting... The point is that these stories are not for the faint of heart. You've got 25 tales in here, and all of them go through sex and romance and love and hate in a very raw and very visceral manner, which I hugely appreciate, and not every reader will. It really depends on your sensibilities. Brontez Purnell doesn't care, and I think that's a wonderful thing. This is a book that is written, not a book that is designed to be read, if that makes sense. Brontez Purnell seems to have written 100 Boyfriends for himself. And as one critic says somewhere in the opening of this book, this is a book that seems to be written for the queer community, in jokes about gay sex and gay life, that anyone can read, no matter what your sexual disposition is, no matter what you identify as. You can buy and read these stories. And that means that it's almost like this is a window into a culture that not every reader of this book is going to be able to identify with, and that's a really exciting thing. It goes back to the reason why I started all of Books and Bow as a means of exploring translated literature from all around the world. We need windows into other people's lives. We need windows into other cultures and other ways of living life. And this is another one. I imagine if you are a gay reader, if you are an American reader, if you are a black gay American reader, you'll probably get the most out of this book in terms of being able to empathize and relate to it. That doesn't mean that you won't if you're not. These are very funny, gripping, scary, exciting tales. I think we can all relate to the idea that we sometimes have really scary thoughts, or we've all done weird things, taboo things, and we think, Jesus, do other people think like this? Have other people done these weird things that I've done or thought the weird things that I've thought? Well, Brontez Purnell is here to tell you, oh yes, honey. Yes, absolutely. And that's okay. The cat is tearing apart cardboard. Are you done? She's not done. I don't know how well I've done at describing this book, honestly, and I don't know how long I've been talking for. It's really difficult. I think this is one of the hardest books that I've ever had to describe because it doesn't ever come to a conclusion in any way, because short stories often don't. These are snippets of life and lived experiences, and they are punk and angry and raw and funny. As I said, it is split into 3 acts, and those 3 acts are supposed to, I guess, be thematically different from one another based on the names that they're given, but this is a collection of stories, and so these acts are really only used to kind of bind them together into 3 separate, tonally different things. But whether or not you identify with that and whether or not you can tell that's what it's doing is really up to you. The acts are titled Army of Lovers, 100-page breakup letter, and No New Boyfriends. And I guess those 3 things are kind of themes or topics, or at least a tone to follow. But I didn't really notice it myself. Maybe I didn't pay close enough attention, but I did have it in my mind all the way through, and I still didn't. It's up to you. These are stories that come and go very quickly. You get a window into someone's life, someone's experiences. You don't usually get their name, and then you move on. And it's really exciting to see a window into life like this. Of course, these are political stories to a point. They do not have a political agenda. They are not trying to convince you of anything. But they are stories that deal in some way with gender politics, sexual politics, race, class, and all of those things amalgamated together, because they are set in a modern America written by a queer black writer. You can't escape that, and you shouldn't. And that's partly what makes them so exciting, and again, what makes them so punk. The gloves are off. Brontez Purnell is writing for himself, and for any reader who cares to listen, and cares to read, and cares to enjoy. If you don't, well, that's up to you. I loved these stories. I loved 100 Boyfriends, and I hugely recommend it. Also, this book is published by Cypher Press, who are a fantastic independent publisher in the UK, and they will be mentioned on my video about great independent publishers as soon as I get around to making it, I promise. Go read 100 Boyfriends, support Brontez Purnell, support Cypher Press, and be awesome. And join our Patreon and subscribe for books. I'll see you later.